The air was thick with the scent of alcohol, sweat, and something far more dangerous, desire. My head swam, heavy from the whiskey coursing through my veins, but it wasn't just the alcohol that made my body burn. It was him, Ethan. His hands were on me, strong, rough, insistent. My back hit the cool surface of the kitchen counter, sending a shiver up my spine as his fingers traced the curve of my waist. The contrast between the cold marble and the heat of his touch made my breath hitch. I should have stopped him. I should have pushed him away, reminded myself who I was, who he was, and how much I stood to lose. But instead, I tilted my head back, exposing my neck, surrendering to the fire consuming me. Are you sure? His voice was husky, filled with restraint that was slipping by the second. I should have said no. Instead, I whispered, yes. That was all it took. His mouth crashed against mine. Rough and hungry. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing, just pure reckless need. My fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, gasping as he pressed himself against me. I could feel every inch of him, every sharp inhale of his breath, every tremor in his body as his hands roamed over me. I let out a soft moan as his lips trailed down my jaw, his tongue flicking against my pulse. My body arched into him instinctively, craving more, needing more. His hand slipped beneath my dress, fingertips ghosting over my thighs, teasing, tormenting, pushing the thin fabric of my panties aside, barely brushing against me. The teasing was unbearable, and when he finally pressed his fingers against me, a sharp gasp escaped my lips. God! My head fell back as pleasure washed over me, hot and dizzying. He exhaled a shaky breath, watching my face, my body reacting to his touch. You're already so wet, he murmured, slipping one finger inside me then another. I bit my lip, my fingers gripping his shoulders, nails digging into his skin as he worked me open, slow and deliberate. My body trembled, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I wanted more. Don't stop, I whispered. His control snapped. In an instant, he lifted me onto the counter, spreading my thighs further apart. His lips found mine again, his kiss rough, desperate. The sound of his belt unbuckling sent another rush of heat through me. My breath caught in my throat as I felt the hard length of him pressing against me, teasing, stretching. His forehead pressed against mine, his breath unsteady. Tell me to stop. I couldn't. I didn't want to. Instead, I shifted my hips, urging him forward, and with one slow, deep thrust, he buried himself inside me. A strangled moan tore from my lips as he filled me completely, stretching me in the most intoxicating way. Ethan groaned, his grip on my hips tightening as he pulled back, only to thrust in again, deeper this time. It was too much. And not enough. I clung to him, my legs wrapping around his waist as he moved, hard and unrelenting. The sound of our bodies colliding, the ragged breaths, the barely restrained moans. It was everything. I knew this was wrong. I knew this could destroy everything, but in that moment I didn't care. My body was on fire, pleasure coiling tight in my core. His hands were everywhere, gripping my thighs, my waist, my hair, holding me in place as he drove into me over and over again. I could feel myself unraveling, pleasure building to the breaking point. Ethan, I gasped, my nails raking down his back. His pace quickened, his breathing ragged, his movements growing erratic. He was close just as I was, and when his fingers found my most sensitive spot, circling, pressing, I shattered. A cry tore from my throat as pleasure crashed over me, white-hot and overwhelming. My body convulsed, tightening around him as waves of ecstasy washed over me. Ethan groaned, his body tensing before he followed, his own release hitting him like a force of nature. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Our breaths mingled, our bodies tangled, the air between us thick with the aftermath of what we had just done. And then reality set in. I pulled away slightly, my heart still hammering. Ethan was staring at me, his expression unreadable. Guilt settled like a heavy weight in my chest. We shouldn't have done that, I whispered. His jaw clenched, his hands still gripping my waist, as if he couldn't bear to let go. I know, he said. But neither of us moved. Neither of us could. Because deep down we both knew. This wasn't the last time. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a golden glow over the tangled sheets and our bare bodies. My head rested on Ethan's chest, his arm draped lazily around my waist. For a brief, fleeting moment, everything felt right. Warm. Safe. And then it hit me. I shot up, my heart hammering. What the fuck had I done? Ethan stirred beside me, groaning as he ran a hand over his face. His eyes, still heavy with sleep, met mine. Chloe. His voice was rough, laced with something unreadable. I shook my head, scrambling to collect my clothes from the floor. My dress, my panties, my bra. I grabbed them in a frantic rush, my hands trembling. This was a mistake, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding in my ears. Ethan sat up, the sheets pooling around his waist, exposing the sculpted lines of his torso. His gaze darkened. You didn't seem to think that last night. Heat rushed to my face, a mix of shame and something more dangerous, desire. But I forced myself to focus. Last night had been reckless. Selfish. I tucked my dress over my head, avoiding his eyes. We have to forget this ever happened. Silence. And then a bitter chuckle. Forget, he repeated, his voice edged with disbelief. You think we can just pretend this never happened? I swallowed hard, my fingers curling into fists. We have to. For Ava. His jaw tightened at the mention of her name. Ava, my best friend. His girlfriend. The woman who trusted us both. A sickening wave of guilt crashed over me. Ethan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his messy dark hair. Chloe, you and I both know this isn't just going to disappear. I looked at him then, my stomach twisting. Because he was right. Last night wasn't just a drunken mistake. It was something more. Something dangerous. A loud vibration shattered the silence. My phone. I grabbed it from the nightstand, my breath hitching when I saw the message waiting for me. Unknown number. I know what you did. A cold chill ran down my spine. My fingers tightened around the device as my pulse skyrocketed. Ethan noticed my expression shift. What is it? I hesitated, debating whether to show him. But before I could decide, another message popped up. Unknown number. You should be careful, Chloe. Secrets have a way of coming out. My stomach dropped. What the fuck? My voice shook as I turned the screen toward Ethan. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the messages. His expression darkened. His body tensing. Who the hell is this? I shook my head. I don't know. My mind raced. Who could possibly know? We had been careful. The apartment had been empty. No one had been here. Had they? The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through me. Ethan swung his legs over the edge of the bed, already in motion. We need to find out who's behind this. I barely heard him. My own thoughts spinning out of control. I forced myself to think. Could it be Ava? Had she suspected something? Followed us? No. She would have confronted me directly. She wouldn't play mind games like this. Then who? Another buzz. I inhaled sharply, my fingers shaking as I opened the message. Unknown number. Do you really think you can keep this from her? From him? I felt like I was going to be sick. Ethan grabbed the phone from my hands, his jaw clenching. This is a fucking threat. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my knees weak. What if they tell Ava? My voice was barely above a whisper. Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he paced the room, his fists clenched, his muscles taut with tension. Then finally he stopped. His eyes met mine. Something unreadable flashing behind them. If someone knows, he said slowly, we need to figure out what they want. I swallowed. And if they just want to ruin us? His expression hardened. Then we make sure they don't. His confidence should have been reassuring, but it wasn't. Because deep down I knew, this wasn't over. It was just beginning. I barely made it through the day. Every conversation felt forced, every interaction tinged with paranoia. My skin prickled every time my phone buzzed, my heart racing in fear that it would be another message. But for the rest of the day, my screen remained silent. That silence was somehow worse. By the time evening rolled around, I was exhausted. But I knew there was no chance I'd be able to sleep. Ethan had texted me earlier. Ethan, we need to talk. My place. 9 p.m. I shouldn't have gone. Every rational part of me screamed to stay away. But rationality had stopped guiding me the second I let him touch me that night. Now I was trapped in something I didn't understand. And I wasn't sure I wanted to escape. I arrived at Ethan's apartment just before 9. He opened the door almost immediately, pulling me inside before I could even knock. His fingers wrapped around my wrist, hot, firm, possessive. I yanked my arm away, my heart slamming against my ribs. Jesus, Ethan. Someone's watching us, he muttered, ignoring my protest. My stomach dropped. What? He shut the door behind me, his eyes scanning the hallway before locking it. Then he turned, his face hard serious. I got a message too. He pulled his phone from his pocket, handing it to me. Unknown number. You think you can protect her? You can't even protect yourself. A sharp chill ran down my spine. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tightening. This isn't just some random asshole messing with us. Whoever this is, they know what happened. I swallowed, my hands trembling as I set his phone down. It could be Ava. The words felt foreign. Impossible, but I forced them out. Maybe she found out and... No, Ethan's voice was firm, absolute. Ava wouldn't do this. If she knew, she'd come at us head on. I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. Because if it wasn't Ava, then who the hell was it? I exhaled shakily, pacing the length of the room. Okay, so what do we do? Ethan watched me for a long moment before stepping closer. Too close. I should have moved back. I didn't. We don't do anything, he said, his voice lower, now smoother. We act normal. We don't react. And we sure as hell don't let them see we're scared. I nodded, but the truth was, I was terrified. Ethan's gaze burned into mine. His presence, his scent. The heat radiating off his body. It was all too much. And then his hand was on my waist. I sucked in a sharp breath as his fingers curled against me, firm yet gentle. Ethan, tell me to stop. I didn't. I couldn't. His lips crashed against mine, and suddenly, everything else ceased to exist. My back hit the wall as his hands roamed my body, urgent, desperate. His fingers slipped under my sweater, tracing up my spine, and I shuddered at the contact. This was wrong. We were in danger. And yet, I let him take control. Let him lift me. Press me against the cold surface as his mouth devoured mine. Let him make me forget. Because in that moment, forgetting was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. Morning light crept through the blinds, casting thin golden lines across my bare skin. My body ached in the most delicious way. A lingering reminder of last night's reckless indulgence. Ethan was still asleep beside me, his arm draped possessively over my waist, his breathing slow and steady. For a fleeting moment, I let myself enjoy the warmth of his body, the illusion of peace. But it didn't last. Reality hit like a freight train. I slipped out of bed as quietly as possible, grabbing my clothes from where they were haphazardly scattered across the floor. My hands trembled as I pulled my sweater over my head, my mind replaying every sin, every mistake. Last night was a disaster. It shouldn't have happened. Again. But I couldn't deny the way my body still craved him, the way my skin still tingled from his touch. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the guilt away, forcing myself to breathe. This had to stop. I turned toward the door, but before I could take a step, his voice stopped me. You're running again. I froze, my pulse spiking. When I turned, Ethan was watching me through heavy-lidded eyes. His hair a tousled mess, his lips slightly swollen from sleep. He looked devastatingly good. I tore my gaze away. I need to go. He sat up, running a hand through his hair. Why? I didn't answer. He exhaled sharply, swinging his legs over the edge of the bed. You keep acting like this is some huge mistake. But if that were true, you wouldn't keep coming back. My stomach twisted. Ethan. Just admit it, Celeste. He stood, closing the distance between us, his voice softer now, almost pleading. You want this as much as I do. I swallowed hard, my resolve crumbling. But before I could respond, his phone buzzed. The tension in the room shifted instantly. Ethan grabbed his phone from the nightstand, his brows furrowing as he read the screen. Without thinking, I stepped closer, my stomach twisting in dread. What is it? He didn't answer right away. Then slowly he turned the screen toward me. Unknown number. Hope you had fun last night. Shame it won't last. A chill raced down my spine. My hands clenched into fists. They're watching us, I whispered. Ethan's jaw tightened. Yeah. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Who could be doing this? How did they know? My gaze flickered to the window, paranoia creeping in. Were they outside? Watching us right now? Ethan's expression darkened as he tossed the phone onto the bed. I'm done playing this game. A beat of silence. Then his hands were on my face, tilting my chin up, forcing me to meet his gaze. And I'm going to keep you safe. Something in his voice, in his touch, made my chest tighten. I hated how much I wanted to believe him, how much I wanted to trust that he could fix this. But deep down I knew, this was only the beginning. The next few days passed in a blur of tension and unanswered questions. Ethan was on edge, constantly looking over his shoulder. His temper shorter than usual. I could feel the distance growing between us, the weight of everything pressing down like a storm about to break. And then it happened. Ava invited me over. It felt normal enough, an innocent invitation for coffee, something we'd done 100 times before. But as I stood outside her apartment door, something felt off. I knocked. Ava opened the door almost immediately, a bright smile on her face. But her eyes were unreadable. Hey, come in. I hesitated for half a second before stepping inside. The air felt thick, charged with something I couldn't quite place. Ava led me to the living room, where 2 cups of coffee were already waiting on the table. I sat down slowly, studying her. You seem different. She tilted her head, a small, amused smile tugging at her lips. Do I? Something about her tone made my stomach twist. I reached for my coffee, more for something to do than anything else. So, what's up? She studied me for a long moment before finally speaking. Celeste, she said softly, do you love him? My breath hitched. What? She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. Ethan. My pulse pounded. Ava. What are you talking about? She exhaled, shaking her head with a sad smile. You really don't see it, do you? See what? The walls felt like they were closing in. My grip tightened around the coffee cup. Ava, just tell me what's going on. She looked almost sorry. And then she said the words that shattered my world. Ethan isn't who you think he is. The room spun. I forced myself to breathe, my voice barely a whisper. What are you talking about? Ava's expression darkened. He's been lying to you. Since the beginning. I shook my head. That doesn't make any sense. Doesn't it? She leaned back, crossing her arms. Think about it, Celeste. Think about the messages. The threats. The way he always knows exactly what to say to keep you close. My chest tightened. You think Ethan is behind this? She didn't answer. But she didn't have to. Something cold settled in my stomach. No, that was impossible. Ethan wouldn't. Would he? I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. I need to go. Ava didn't try to stop me. As I reached the door, she spoke again. Be careful, Celeste. I hesitated, my hand gripping the doorknob. Then I left. My mind was a whirlwind as I stepped out onto the street. My heart pounded. My stomach churned. None of this made sense. Ethan wouldn't do this. He couldn't. But doubt had already taken root. And I wasn't sure if I'd ever be able to shake it. Night had settled over the city, its silence pressing against me like an unbearable weight. My footsteps echoed in the empty streets as I made my way back to Ethan's apartment. Every word Ava had said replayed in my head, twisting my thoughts into knots. Ethan isn't who you think he is. He's been lying to you. Since the beginning. It couldn't be true. It didn't make sense. But the doubt was there now, poisoning every memory, every touch, every whispered promise. I reached his building and hesitated at the entrance, my breath catching. My fingers curled into fists at my sides before I forced myself to move forward. Inside, the air was thick with tension, the dim lighting casting long shadows against the walls. Ethan was waiting for me. He leaned against the counter in his kitchen, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. His phone was on the counter beside him, the screen dark. He had been waiting. For me. You saw her, he said quietly, his voice devoid of emotion. I swallowed. Yeah. His jaw tightened. And, I hesitated. She told me things. He exhaled sharply, pushing off the counter. Of course. She did. I searched his face, my heart pounding against my ribs. Ethan, tell me the truth. Are you the one behind the messages? His head snapped up, something flashing in his eyes. Hurt. Anger. Frustration. You really think I would do that to you? I opened my mouth, but no words came out. I didn't know what to believe anymore. He ran a hand through his hair, letting out a bitter laugh. Wow. After everything, you still don't trust me. I took a shaky breath. I don't know what to believe. A tense silence stretched between us. Then his phone buzzed. Both of us turned to look at it. A single message flashed on the screen. Unknown number, time's up. A cold wave of dread washed over me. Ethan grabbed the phone, his fingers tightening around it. His face darkened. Fuck. My stomach twisted. Ethan, what's going on? He looked at me then, something raw in his gaze. I was trying to protect you. My pulse spiked. From what? Before he could answer, the door burst open. Ava stood in the doorway, her eyes wild, her breathing ragged. Celeste, get away from him. Ethan's entire body tensed. Ava, don't. She stepped forward, her voice shaking. He's lying to you. I looked between them, my chest tightening. Somebody tell me what the hell is going on. Ava turned to me, her expression desperate. Celeste, listen to me. The messages, the threats, it wasn't just about scaring you. It was about controlling you. And Ethan, he knew. He knew everything. I shook my head. That doesn't make sense. Why would he? She cut me off. Because he's not who you think he is. And neither am I. The room tilted. My fingers curled into fists. What are you talking about? Ethan's voice was tight. Ava, stop. But she didn't. She turned to me, her gaze locked onto mine. Celeste, we're not just strangers. We never were. My breath hitched. What? She swallowed hard. We're sisters. The words slammed into me like a tidal wave. My knees nearly buckled. No, I shook my head violently. That's not possible. She exhaled shakily. It is. And Ethan knew. He's known for a long time. I turned to him, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would shatter. Ethan. His jaw clenched. He didn't deny it. Something inside me cracked. Ava's voice was soft. Your mother. My mother. They were the same person, Celeste. I couldn't breathe. Ethan took a step forward, his voice desperate. Celeste, listen to me. I didn't tell you because I knew it would destroy you. Tears burned my eyes. So you lied to me instead? I was trying to protect you. I let out a hollow laugh. Protect me? Ethan, I trusted you. My voice broke. I loved you. Pain flashed across his face. Ava reached for me, but I jerked away. No. I need to think. Ethan's expression darkened. You don't have time to think, Celeste. They're coming. I frowned. Who? Before he could answer, glass shattered. A gunshot rang out. I screamed, ducking instinctively as chaos erupted around me. Ethan lunged for me, grabbing my arm and pulling me toward the hallway. We have to go. Now. Ava was already moving, her eyes wild with panic. Shit. More shots. We ran. My mind was a mess of confusion and fear. My body moving on pure adrenaline. The sound of footsteps pounded behind us, too close, too fast. Ethan yanked open a door, shoving me through it. Go. I stumbled down a dark stairwell. Ava right behind me. Ethan followed, slamming the door shut behind him. We kept running. By the time we burst out into the alley behind the building, my lungs were burning. Ava doubled over, gasping. What the fuck was that? Ethan was already scanning the area, his expression grim. They found us faster than I expected. I turned to him, my entire body trembling. Who are they? He hesitated. Ava answered for him. Our father's people. Ice flooded my veins. Ethan turned to me, his voice deadly serious. Celeste, you need to listen to me very carefully. This isn't just about us. This is about power. Control. They want to use you. And they will, if we don't stop them. I swallowed hard. How do we stop them? Ethan met my gaze, his expression unreadable. We fight. Ava exhaled shakily. Or we run. I looked between them, my pulse pounding. For the first time in my life I had a choice. And I had no idea what to do.